of foundation-specific meetings with Rune Christensen. We're here to discuss one of the most important documents that we've released to date, which is the foundation proposal. And for anyone who hasn't had a chance to read that, I highly recommend that you do. It's sort of setting the stage in many ways for what MakerDAO will be, what we hope MakerDAO will look like in the next few years. And this also represents the opportunity for anybody who has a stake in the foundation or wants to get a stake in the foundation. You can join up, discuss the future with us, and help us shape what the MakerDAO will turn into. Before we kick it off, let's do some introductions. My name is Richard Brown. I'm the technical community manager at MakerDAO. We're joined by Jess and Rune. Jess, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm also a community manager, and I'm going to be helping out with the chat. So if you have questions that arise during this discussion, please chat them in, and I'll do my best to get them asked and answered.
Cool. Rune?
Yeah, there. I'm Rune Christensen, co-founder of Maker and CEO of the Maker Foundation.
Okay, so we've, like I said, this is the fourth meeting. We've been plowing through the foundation proposal sort of top to bottom. Most of the time so far has been spent discussing some of the nuances around the 20% principle, and I think that we might have maybe one or two questions left there. But this week I'm hoping that we'll be able to move on to some of the other major sections that are, I think, no less important. We need to touch on sustainable finance, what that means. Gradual decentralization, which I think is huge, and it's something that we're kind of in a position to set the stage for the rest of the space. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about there. Maintaining market focus is another big issue that we should give some time to. One thing that we won't be discussing in too much depth in this call are things related to scientific governance. We have a specific regular meeting on Thursdays, so tomorrow at the same time. If you want to join us for a deep dive into scientific governance, what that means, and discussing the risk framework, that's a great place to do it. Please join us.
What do you mean by scientific governance?
Well, that's a great question. Rune, do you want to give us a brief recap of what scientific governance is?
Yeah, so scientific governance is like the name of one of the first of the five principles we spelled out in the foundation proposal. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like it's the most like it's like the deepest rabbit hole of all the principles, because it's kind of like the entire umbrella term. It's kind of like how we want to describe the overall framework for our risk governance. And the idea is basically we want to our most important goal is to avoid like basically the popularity contests for how collateral is chosen, because there's a lot of risk there for conflict of interest and then and just like bad decisions. And rather we want it to be a consensus seeking, a sort of compromise seeking exercise of using scientific arguments and data driven, evidence driven decision making to try to achieve something that is like as objectively good as possible for maximal stability of DAI.
So when it comes to making a governance decision, it's not based on the weight of how compelling the argument is. It's based on the data set that's used and how reproducible that model is and how well fleshed out and understandable it is based on established best practices and scientific principles. So.
Right, and there's a blog post on this I think I read. So just making the connection with the name to the post now.
Yeah, that's another fundamental post in the history of Maker as well. And it's definitely worth a read. Yeah,
and so we have Stephen, who is the head of risk in the Maker Foundation, doing the calls every Thursday. He just recently released the first of his papers in scientific governance, but he is like releasing a whole series of them and doing calls every Thursday to get the scientific debate started, basically. I mean, at this point, it's still just like a learning, like a teaching experience mostly. But the whole point is eventually to kickstart a scientific community of people who actually, in like a decentralized, collaborative manner, reach consensus and come to compromise on the stuff that they then want to vote in. And in some sense, our goal with scientific governance is that we actually want to it's never going to be possible. And also, it's never like it is not also isn't achievable to make like true like hard science, like hard scientific governance in a sense where everything can be entirely objective and data driven and so on. There will always be this like human element and even like political and social elements to it. But what we want to do is we want to minimize that as much as we possibly can, and then try to bridge the last mile, kind of like the last gap of the potential for conflict of interest and social, political, all these issues there. Basically bridge that by having a super high quality community of experts and people like idealists with the right mindset. And then also this like high level of integrity and principle-based like community, basically, right? That is really exemplified by the 20% principle and like the idea that we create this shared commitment to charity that then is the basis for how we sort of unite around, you know, like this. The greater goal is to make something, you know, make the perfect stablecoin, and we are in it together to contribute to this and also see all these other beneficial outcomes for the world. And then as a side effect of that, we also get rich because we invest in MPR and so on. But kind of like the point is kind of we want to make sure that the selfishness of like that component doesn't become the primary driver in governance, because then things can very quickly go to financial crisis levels.
Mm. All right, Rune, did you want to devote any time today to the 20% principle? I know that we've gone over it in a few meetings, but there's 2 or 3 community questions that we didn't get a chance to address.
Yeah, I think we should mostly go over. I mean, we can talk a little bit about gradual decentralization and strong market focus, because we haven't really covered those before. But I think those are very short topics compared to, they're not really controversial. But then otherwise, I think, yeah, we should just like talk about random questions and discuss random stuff, because mostly we've reached, like, we already covered most of the meat of this.
All right, so I'm going to start tossing some hardballs at you then. So, I think there's still some confusion around the source of the funds that will be devoted to the 20% principle. There's been talk of matching of funds, matching from the dev fund. Then eventually the dev fund becomes distributed, and potentially they'll be drawn from fees. Can you provide us some clarity of where the money comes from for the 20% principle and some timelines around that?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, the most important thing is to understand that Maker, the decentralized infrastructure of Maker fundamentally is designed in such a way that any decisions to put money anywhere, do anything with the money, always have to go through the governance process, right? It has to be voted through. So that's sort of the number. So no matter what the foundation says or does, we can never, ultimately we're just suggesting governance behavior for the community to vote through. And then the second thing is the community has the power to do pretty much anything if it votes, like if it can come to consensus and vote for it. Maker is incredibly flexible in how we can, for instance, how we can draw money out of the system. So we can do stuff like, for instance, MPR holders can vote to fund oracles, for instance, right? So they actually have paid money to ensure they have proper security and have the right incentives. And basically anything else. That could also be that MPR holders could vote to give to charity at any time they wanted to, in any amount, or whatever they want to do, right? Because you can just simply, the system just allows you to do that. You can vote for whatever you want. But specifically what we are proposing with the foundation proposal is actually not a vote, we're not proposing a voter behavior. We're not saying in the future we think you guys should vote like this and you should vote to assign fees to charity out of the stability fees, something like that. What we're proposing is that we take 200,000 MPR, which we currently hold in the dev fund, and we initially just manage those internally in the foundation, and then later basically do legal research and consult with the community to figure out the best long-term setup for this pool of 200,000 MPR. And then from that pool, we draw the funds we draw the funds that are going to be used for the 20% principal, and we do so in a sustainable manner so that the pool of funds never runs out. And then that's where sort of the 20% comes in, because 200K of the total MKR supply right now is like, that's 20% of the total MKR supply. And that also means you have like a 20%, you basically get 20% of the surplus of the system.
Okay, so that covers some of the basics. So initially, people that sort of are viciously self-interest or financially self-interest have little concern about missing out on dilution of the Maker token, because this, for the foreseeable future at least, it's exclusively coming out of the dev fund, right?
The thing is actually that this is going to be massively profitable from the point of view of an MKR holder in terms of like freely distributed and sort of MKR available in the economy. Because what we're basically doing is we're locking up a lot of MKR, and we're making it very clear that this MKR will be distributed on a very long-term basis, rather than, you know, the way that the other funds of this foundation have been distributed, which has basically been based on like short-term business goals. However, like that doesn't mean that the community or like the foundation is going to run out of funds to meet short-term business goals, because, like I said before, MKR holders can vote at any time to do whatever they want with the income of Maker. So, yeah.
Well, that's interesting, and you've said some things that could be considered scary. So and it might be a good segue into decentralized governance or gradual decentralization, because when you say that Maker holders can decide to do things whenever, the point of gradual decentralization, and I'll let you introduce it to us in a second, or this could be your segue, but with a true DAO, with a distributed governance model, that there's a possibility that people could jump in and start doing things before the training wheels are off, and we need to help educate people about what governance looks like and what levers and knobs have been exposed to the world to configure at what time. So do you want to talk a bit about decentralized or gradual decentralization and how we ensure the stability of the DAO as we sort of learn how to do governance?
Yeah, I mean, and I appreciate you pointing out that it can sound very scary what you said. I mean, so let me clarify. I mean, I'm talking about the technical capabilities of the smart contract infrastructure, right? And my point is that it's extremely strong, and all the power is in the hands of MKR holders, because the tech is truly decentralized. So there is no middleman or something like that, right? Like authority or something that could possibly make these decisions. Like, it's technically impossible for that to be the case in the system, unless MKR holders choose it. But I mean, again, right? Technically, they have the ability to do whatever they want, but no one else has the ability to impose, to sort of, in a technical sense, impose anything on MKR holders. But of course, and I'm not even like, this is entirely outside this is missing the framework of this is missing the context of the governance framework, because of course, the last thing we want is that you can do, tell MKR holders, you can do whatever you want, go be free, go crazy. That would be a complete disaster, obviously. And that is kind of and I think actually the Maker community recognizes this more than anything else. And this is kind of one of I think is a really good sign of the quality of the Maker community, is that the Maker community right now have, like, a lot of people are very focused sort of on what is it actually going to take from Maker and the Maker community to achieve what it's supposed to achieve in the long run, and where are we today, and and kind of like, I mean, hopefully there's a plan in between those two places, right? Because obviously, we have some incredibly smart people in the community, but obviously, what we're trying to achieve is something where you can't just have a bunch of smart people and then hope it works. You need a really good plan, and that plan is what we call gradual decentralization, right? And basically, the idea is that the way we make something decentralized is not saying, okay, guys, you're free, go out and do your thing. It's rather we basically start off being almost, right now, single collateral DAI is fundamentally decentralized, but it's like controlled in a very, it's still like the the infrastructure, the technology itself is decentralized, but sort of the social layer around it is very centralized, which can be seen, for instance, how we are voting through, like how we increase the debt ceiling, for instance, where it was primarily foundation employees and like sort of the early adopter community who also happen to be developers and able, who are able to use the command line interface to actually vote in a safe way, because there's no way to like safely vote for someone who's not highly technical right now. And we actually like, this is to some extent this is deliberate, because we don't, like right now the needs of single collateral DAI are like very much, it's kind of like it's a beta. It needs to exist and sort of provide a good stable point until we get to multi-collateral DAI, but it's not really supposed to do anything beyond that. So so we don't want to like encourage a lot of so like basically community like large scale governance or like large scale involvement in how single collateral DAI is run, because it's just not the system that people actually supposed to focus on, right? That system is multi-collateral DAI.
So can you sort of help me to form a mental model of what gradual decentralization would look like? So rolled out over time. So obviously one of the hard criteria is we need publicly facing and safe governance tools that make sense to our end users. We need to have like a very well established, we need to with a high level of quality for the proposals, the scientific proposals and frameworks that we use to establish what people vote on. And then is there this gradual roadmap of the scope of proposals that the foundation is willing to entertain? Is that the idea?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, so focusing on risk governance and focusing on proposals is one of the things to look at. But actually what I prefer to think in terms of is actually is actually like the identity of the MKR holder and how they sort of identify themselves in the overall system. And basically right now, and this is the case, this is totally the case right now, is that MKR holders right now primarily trust the foundation to be the group of people who sort of got things under control with Maker. And even if you're an MKR holder right now and you don't fully get what's going on, kinda, that's not, that's not a total disaster, because the foundation is actually taking on this role of being like the guys who are holding the fort and making sure that everything is running as it's supposed to right now. And the end goal, like where we want to be in the future, is that as an MKR holder, you are the first class citizen, like you are the governor of the system. And there needs to be a completely level playing field and no type of like hierarchy or like both in terms of like social structure, I guess you can say, right? Where like there's no people who you're as a member of the community, you're supposed to defer more to these guys because they have this title or this role or something. Right, and that's actually circles towards scientific governance and like the idea of proposals, right? Because the whole point is you don't care about who they are, you care about what they're saying.
So you're saying that the path to gradual decentralization is not just tooling and not just frameworks, but it's also a process of education. Is that what it is? Sort of ramping up the most engaged stakeholders to understand the work that maybe Maker's been doing up until this point and the work that needs to be continued?
Yeah, it's education, and then it's also just like the feeling of ownership, I guess you would say, right? I mean, it's actually the emotional connection. I mean, of course, that part, like that doesn't mean anything in the real world, but I think the emotional connection and also the feeling of true ownership and like the feeling of sovereignty over the system is the thing that ultimately in the long run will drive people to like truly take responsibility for how they participate in governance, and also how they, another really major like characteristic of the community in the long run is that it has to actively organize and resist attempts at like power grabs, right? Like attempts at centralization. And that's perhaps the most important feature of a truly decentralized community and a truly decentralized system is that it actually has this like anti-fragile approach where if there's like an attempt at a takeover, there's a very rapid and very violent response to that, right? Like it's, you know, it should not be possible to like slowly creep up and like strategically you know, socially engineer you into some position that actually gives you like a semblance of control over the system, right? But rather the system and the community and the people involved fundamentally needs to feel and to sort of demand that there is no like central authority. There's no one with special rights or access.
Well, that's a fascinating topic. If we're talking about cartels and coalitions and parties forming, or even activist investors, if you want to look at it from that perspective. So do you think that the primary way that Maker will defend against that kind of thing is through cultural consensus, or is it, or will there be actual mechanisms in place to guard against that?
I mean, I think both, I guess. I mean, but I think, yeah, absolutely. I think it's cultural. It's like I feel, and I think that decentralization itself is like a cultural thing. I mean, I think something like Bitcoin is primarily decentralized because people perceive it as decentralized and sort of fight for its decentralization. And let's, I mean, if you actually think about it, the thing that keeps Bitcoin decentralized is not actually the technology or the blocks or the proof of work or anything like that. It is the threat that ultimately we will manually go in and like hard fork if someone tries to, I don't know, like we will move to another soft fork, I guess. We'll manually soft fork if some rogue miner tries to like truly take over the system, right? It's like people will be like, well, not on my, like, you know, the Bitcoin I value is not the one where this guy is doing that kind of stuff. So I'm going to move to this other, and just, I mean, that is sort of the fundamental backstop that creates the shorter term incentives for the whole thing to make sense, because you know that ultimately people will just not accept like a total takeover of it. Well, potentially anyway. Of course, it's not possible to really predict that. But anyways, that's the same. I mean, that's the same thing about the Maker community, right? It's like there needs to be this like strong cultural consensus around the, you know, basically that it needs to be as objective and as equal a playing field as possible.
That leads me to a list of questions that I've been collecting from Reddit related to gradual decentralization. I want to throw some of those at you. I think you just sort of touched on one of them, but to formalize it, question, what are some of the threats to the vision of long-term decentralization? What do the foundation and the voters need to be cognizant of as we head down this road?
So, yeah, I mean, so now we talked a lot about the long-term, where we want to end up, right? And then, of course, the point of gradual decentralization is, it is actually to some degree that we cannot sit down today and define what the future exactly will look like. So what we can more do is like we can try to sort of like decide which direction, which path we try to go, and that is basically one where, and I mean, I guess you can only really define it based on the long-term view, right? But like one of the things that's really important is that people have like the influence people have is based on their merit, right? And it's kind of like when you participate in something in a decentralized system, and let's say when you contribute to the Bitcoin source code, right? Your contribution is accepted based on its quality and nothing else, right? And that's sort of what we have so many places in Maker where you could contribute, not just the freaking source code, but which actually is also open for contribution, right? But also governance and also like various like control point, like various, what do you call that? Like control points in the system, right? Like oracles, global settlement, like all these things. We even have charity as well as another component where people will be actively contributing to that. And basically, gradual decentralization means when we open up community contribution at the social level, so when we sort of socially go out and say, hey guys, let's start really discussing and you know, and make future executive decisions based on these open discussions and nothing else, because that's how it's going to be in the long run. But when we do that for some particular thing, we have to have already educated the community on that thing. And also we have to have already have ensured that everything else we've tried decentralizing so far has been a success. So it's very important that it doesn't descend into chaos. That's kind of like the main thing. We don't want to, we don't want it to be that it's that people feel out of control and the environment where it's actually just who shouts the loudest starts to appear.
Yeah, I think I'm following along. I think so. It's sort of, I'm going to recap again. So kind of cultural consensus that we all kind of arrive at as a group over the next few months. There's an educational component through these meetings and other documents where we sort of pull back the curtain on the exact requirements and mechanisms and challenges to manage the DAO. There's a creation of a meritocracy, I guess, through raising the bar on the scientific and reproducible proposal framework, and sort of all of that lumped together as this iterative process. So over the course of the next months or years, we'll keep on improving on that, and that's sort of the path to gradual decentralization and rejecting like malignant outside influences.
Yeah, and we want to create this, I guess, positive feedback where basically where the better the community is, like the more competent the community is able to take over the levers we give them. Let's say, for instance, if we, like I say with charity, right? Where if at first we provide, the way we approach charity is that the foundation sort of does research on 3 different charity targets, and then says you can choose between these different targets, and try to and here's some data, some statistics. Here's everything we can sort of come up with, and then you can take that and you can build upon that and see what kind of debate and ultimately decision you can make out of it. And if we then see like this highly, we see this like organic emergence of how people are like actually, they're taking the approach we want, which is the impact, the evidence-driven approach, right? And it's like, well, let's say that doesn't happen, right? Then what we have to do is next time we have to see we have to try to, like the foundation will sort of look at, okay, what's the reason why it didn't work out that we wanted to work out? And we then try to educate even further and sort of help people with how they should, like almost like handhold potentially, right? Like community debates and individuals in the community even to get them to contribute the way that we see as being, this is what can create constructive and sustainable governance in the long run over this particular subject, right? And then once we feel that that's there and we have this like competent decision making between 3 options, then we can say, okay, next time, there's not going to be 3 options from us. Next time, we will invite anyone to come with their own proposal, and then we will like whitelist 10 of them or something. And then if that also goes really well, then we'll say, okay, we don't even, you guys handle it from here, right? Like you can just, like maybe we'll provide a framework where you can make your proposals in, and we'll provide like moderated community calls where you can have your debates, and we will, moderate the Reddit and whatever. And then, but you can do everything yourself on these platforms. And then once that has been, and then once even that goes well, the final part of the final step towards true decentralization happens, which is diversification of the communication channels. So eventually there will be non-foundation controlled forums and community calls and all this stuff where the debate can happen as well, so that it even becomes censorship resistant, right? And I mean, that's going to be a very long process, and it's going to be very hard to keep a coherent community spirit through this. But at the same time, I also think it's doable, because I think it's like going to be like people who participate in this stuff. It's going to be like hard work. It's going to be boring if you're not actually into it, right? I mean, something like charity, for instance, right? You need to actually care about it before you'll bother with this kind of stuff. So I think there is the potential there to just create like this, create a community of people who are given power, basically, for them to use in a very, like, they're given that power because they have shown they're able to use it well. And from there, because they'll see the results of their own skills, basically of what they've created in their own community, that will fuel them to continuously grow their community, right? It'll like create this strong community spirit that can potentially be long run sustainable.
All right, cool. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I have two questions. One is, I'm wondering, sort of just, Rune, this philosophy of governance that you just described, like, I'm wondering if there's any references or, inspirations, things that you've learned about in the past that inspired it.
I mean, I guess just like the scientific process is like the main thing. I'm like, yeah, that's because that is the closest thing in the real world to this stuff, right? And maybe something like medicine, right, is like an interesting thing to look at, because it is like it's a field where everyone are playing with lives, right? And so you have this spirit of, I mean, you have like the doctor's oath, for instance, also, right? But that's not, maybe that's more like in practice in medicine, more than like, but when it comes to like research and development of medicine, right? You have it like, people really have this incentive to work together to solve real problems, and they sort of, like they still deal with the exact same problems that we will expect to deal with, which is like commercial interests, conflict of interest, for that kind of stuff, right? Personal like self-gratification, which is a huge issue in science, and will always be for us as well, right? Because once you take away money as a bigger factor, suddenly ego becomes another thing that becomes really important, and like fame and so on. But despite all of that, basically all of science is doing really well. So that is just like it is possible to create a global span, community that can agree in 99.9% of cases of what kind of chemicals can you safely inject into your brain to like cure some esoteric disease, right? Mm-hmm. And
well, maybe like a concrete example that comes to mind for me is like, I don't know, the medical community on Wikipedia, for example, or just Wikipedia,
yeah, that's
more broadly.
Yeah, Wikipedia is actually a really, really cool. Wikipedia is a great example. Like, and Wikipedia is so amazing because it also has that like, there's like a seriousness to it, right? Because they know it affects real people when there is, so it's just not accepted to like try to put in your commercial interests into Wikipedia or like troll it or something, right? Like, and it's very hard. It's protected very well against those kind of things, and and I imagine, I mean, I don't really know about it, but I imagine that it has never really happened that someone has managed to like bribe a bunch of Wikipedia moderators and like really, because they get like, because they're not getting paid in the first place, they're not there for money in the first place. So like all those like typical attack vectors just don't work in the same way.
Right. And yeah, that actually that point is a great segue to my next question, which is that, because Wikipedia, the currency in that community is essentially its reputation, ego. It's not explicitly financial. Whereas in Maker, there is this token that has financial value. The question is, how does the distribution of token holdings play into progressive decentralization in a practical sense? Like, how do you intend to manage that? And this, I think, comes back to the foundation proposal. But yeah, how important is token distribution here?
Yes, I mean, actually, I guess I think you could say that the question of the token, the power of the token and the token distribution is the main problem we're trying to tackle with the entire framework. Because what we actually want to achieve is that under normal conditions, the tokens you hold should have it should mean nothing. The only thing that should matter is your like arguments and your facts you bring to the table and your data and so on. But ultimately, that works when everyone is being, when everyone has this shared vision and everything is going great. But but the token is very important to have a sort of this, both as like sort of the fallback that ultimately ensures that we have these basic incentives for the system to not go totally crazy. But also it provides a lot of, because again, you cannot create a true scientific, objective answer to everything, and our process that's like purely mechanical or something. So there are going to be a lot of edge cases and like hard questions and issues that can't just, where you just can't reach, you can't reach a consensus. Maybe you can reach a compromise, but sometimes it's like, well, we have to either do one or the other. And that's then where the token is just like those are the kind of situations where like token holders could, for instance, like vote on their opinion when with all the experts like fall down on each side of a debate. And they're basically like, yeah, we just, we can see the other side, we can see our own side. These are the arguments for each side. Now we're just going to have a community vote on it, and then have let's take that as basically as the decision, so we can move on, because we also need and we sort of take that as a compromise, basically, right? We compromise by deferring to a community vote. So it is super crucial that the MPR holders are like very legit and know what they're doing in this type of situation. But I also think that there's going to be a very big difference between active MPR voters and sort of passive MPR voters. And another important goal for us is also to ensure that that is actually not too like a big risk. That, for instance, if there's too many passive MPR voters who don't really have an opinion, basically, or like want to really have an opinion, maybe they want to trade on the outcome of the governance process, which is actually also a super like interesting service in essence that MPR provides, right? It provides this really interesting signal on the market's opinion of how well the governance process is doing.
Jesse, did that answer your question? Because that segues into another community question here.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in really fast, Jess. From the community, there was a question that in one of the calls we touched briefly on voter apathy, and Rune, you just mentioned something about that. Can you expand a bit on some potential plans to combat that?
Yeah, so I think there are several levels to look at this problem, right? And I think the most crucial thing to address is like the existential threat from various attack vectors. So that the most basic one being the governance attack. So literally someone, let's say nobody votes, so some guy buys 20,000 MPR, and that's enough for him to actually take control of the system. Does everyone lose their money then in this case? And of course the answer to that must be no, right? We can't, that's too fragile, basically, if that can actually kill off the system. And in fact, our solution is that we are completely immune actually in terms of this type of attack causing damage to end users because of global settlement and our security delays. So basically, what happens if someone performs a 51% governance attack and that is possible for him to do because of voter apathy, is that the entire system is shut down. Everyone is settled at the net asset, the net value of their assets, and a new system is redeployed where everyone can switch over their assets to the new system, and then the community the active, basically what I would call the surface community. So the part of the community that's actually actively in touch with each other and actually doing governance and sort of are the ones setting the social consensus. They come to a social consensus about who of the MPR holders are going to be included in this new MPR distribution. And for instance, an attacker definitely should always be cut out, right? That's very straightforward. If someone votes for a malicious proposal with 100,000 MPR and we have to shut down the system because of that, when we restart the system, meaning we create a completely fresh deployment and we sort of share drop everything on top of the old setup, we're definitely not going to give that guy any money, right? He's not going to get any new MPR. He's going to lose. He's going to pay for that attack with 100,000 MPR, and that provides some level of compensation for the system actually, because getting 100,000 MKR burned does somewhat make up for the UX hassle of going through a global settlement.
So the global settlement also has a dampening effect on the formation of cartels, or at least hostile takeovers, which is interesting. Traditionally, when people talk about voter apathy, they end up in kind of in two different camps. One is incentivizing voters, I think, which has some attendant risks. Obviously, that's how kind of cartels. If we reward people for voting, then somebody will figure out how to profit from that outside of the actual goals of the voting infrastructure. The other major solution to this that we hear a lot recently is delegated voting or liquid democracy. Is Maker considering either of those options?
Yeah, I mean, so let me talk about the last thing first, right? So, and so that, like, I don't think that's necessarily, like, that is just related to voting in general, right? Like, it does provide, it does maybe provide some help against voter apathy if someone, like, if people are not voting because it's too difficult for them to do it. That might change if they have the option of doing liquid democracy and just choosing a representative. And that's, like, Maker can do anything. So that includes this stuff. Like, and what's really cool is the way something like vote delegation is built on top of Maker is not that it doesn't need to be built into the core system. It's actually like kind of like an add-on feature that you can build on top of it. And we will, of course, in the foundation, build our own sort of official initial version of this. But in the future, maybe there's going to be some more advanced stuff of this type that people want to make in the future. And anyone can at any time create these kind of advanced governance features. So all, like, any type of, like, advanced crazy governance or voting strategy or feature that people can think of, all of that stuff is technically supported by Maker. And it'll be kind of like a free market where people can basically say, hey guys, look at this, my new app where you can do special type of vote delegation, or maybe, like, let's say like a search, like a marketplace, or like a, what is it called? Like an app, like a place where you can see all the guys for you to delegate your votes to, or something, in a new and innovative way or something. Like, there's a free market for people to create that for the sake of better governance. Like, but who knows? Maybe even it can be monetized or funded by MKR voters if they decide to do so. But that's kind of like secondary to the most crucial fact, which is this can be built by anyone. Like, it's permissionless to build this stuff. So anyway, I mean, my point is just there's the technical capabilities of Maker governance is totally unlimited. And the challenge is not technical. The challenge is social, primarily, right? Like,
if I had to guess, I don't think voter apathy is going to be one of the problems that we have to deal with. I'd be willing to bet the opposite will be the case, that there'll be significant stakeholder engagement with this. We're dealing with people's money, after all. So.
Yeah, but so the other thing I want to talk about is vote buying. And that's actually something Jesse was, you sent me that article about this, well, I can't remember his name now. Well, this guy anyway, who made a post about dark DAOs and voter apathy.
Yeah, it was Phil Diane. He's a researcher at Cornell IC3 and does work with the Ethereum Foundation as well.
Yeah, and so he's sort of laid out this, like, I guess, like, this generalized concept of how I feel to some degree his message is even like vote buying is inevitable, and
yeah,
it's inevitable kind of, and it's like it's like happens because of market forces and this kind of stuff, which I think actually, I mean, generally I think our approach at Maker is typically to, like, assume that, like assume things in that sense, right? Like, you kind of have to, like, assume you live in a world where if someone can make money, but, you know, like, people have no morals, they will do whatever it takes for them to get ahead or make money or something like that, right? And you can never, like, assume that out of their goodwill they will, like, not take your money from you if you, like, give them the option of doing that or something like that, right? So the way we, like, I mean, I like to think about vote buying and sort of, and I think we should approach it as, well, it is, I mean, I would say primarily, like first and foremost, I think it is actually cultural, though. I mean, but just because that's like the first thing that's like there, but it's not the actual defense, because, well, I mean, the first line of defense is not the real thing you use to protect yourself, right? But like, I think first of all, for instance, the 20% to charity helps here, because someone who's like gonna sell their votes to like a vote buyer is probably not gonna invest in some socialist asset that's paying 20%. I mean, that is perhaps stretching it a bit, but like, I think there's some connection there that where like, and this is like the filtering we're talking about in terms of the 20% principle, that the kind of people who would do vote buying, this like maximally profit-seeking activity, could like filter themselves out of the community, because they're like, well, these guys obviously, I don't, they're naive. There's no way I'm gonna be involved here, because they're giving 20% to charity. And the other thing is kind of like, it's more like it's more like just like the social level is more like the Maker as a community and as an identity will be one where people will not really, it'll be very frowned upon. Like you can never, like you will never, it'll never be socially acceptable in sort of a Maker community to like participate in vote buying, or like consider it, or like make like the Phil Diane type arguments to say like, well, I mean, this is something we should talk, like we are all free people, we can do whatever we want, so why shouldn't, like, let's make a vote buying circle, and who wants to join me, right? Because any one of you can come and join me, because you're all, you're free humans, you can do whatever you want. And I think that kind of like that kind of, people wouldn't actually buy that kind of argument, right? They would be like, yeah, no, right? I mean, I'm not going to give you a platform to like try to create some vote buying scheme. But I think, yeah, I mean, maybe it's not so interesting, right? Because I think it's the case for almost every single blockchain project. So anyway, onto the actual solution, right? And basically the answer is the same as like what I described before, right? It is actually that, I mean, ultimately vote buying, well, okay, no. So what's more important is that to understand how scientific governance works and how the voting process actually works for Maker, because what we have been very careful in constructing how sort of the scientific governance plays out is that like there's only going to be one actual on-chain vote every quarter. So like the beginning of every quarter, there's like a vote, and that vote then sort of executes all the stuff that governance have agreed upon in the past quarter. And this is what we call the executive vote. And one crucial feature of the executive vote is that it's not actually really a vote. It's actually more like, it's almost more like staking in a sense, because like the vote is like the vote, the way we in the community present it to ourselves is of the format basically, here's the executive, like here's the executive vote. And in the executive vote, you can either vote for the executive proposal, which basically represents all the changes to the system that the community has already agreed upon in a completely open and transparent process where everyone has been allowed to be able to participate. Everyone has had a platform for their fact and evidence-based opinion. We've gone through this whole model where we sort of credibly proven to ourselves and to everyone that this stuff actually represents like the sort of the consensus and the compromise of the community on the kind of in the places where we could get to that. So it's not so the executive vote is not something where people are presented with a choice. The only I mean, other than a very simple choice, which is support the system by voting on the executive vote of the stuff that we've already agreed upon, or attack the system by voting for something else.
Yeah, so Thad actually proposes a sort of interesting idea along those lines. Thad asks to sort of counter low turnout risk if we had layers of government, and he specifies the idea that MKR holders would be like a Congress and the Maker Foundation act as an executive branch. meaning we'd have 2 rounds of voting. And so the first round would be based on the MKR stake. And then if passed, the foundation would get a chance to go ahead and veto the proposal and then send it back to the community, requiring a 2/3 vote to overrule the foundation's veto. Does a sort of layers of government structure like that make sense within this solution, Rune?
Yeah, I mean, so it is actually kind of structured in somewhat a way, somewhat like that, right? But so there's like 3 distinct, well, so yeah, I mean, so let me just like, so basically what I'm saying, right, is that like the executive vote, the thing where you vote for stuff to actually implement stuff on the blockchain, you can only vote for either the thing that has been agreed upon, which represents the sort of the result of all the all the consensus seeking of the preceding quarter and all the votes, sort of the polls that have happened beforehand. So you can either vote for those, or you can vote for something else, which basically means you're attacking the system. You're attacking the governance process, or potentially, I mean, the governance process has been compromised and the whole thing has collapsed basically, and there's like a governance chaos. In which point, the point is kind of moot, because that means like we are now we're sort of in uncharted, like we're in a situation that we hope that we're trying everything we possibly can to never get to, and if we do get to that situation, it might even be that decentralized governance, the way we were trying to do it, just wasn't possible, or maybe our community fundamentally is not able to govern Maker or something like that, right? So like,
I think that comes back to sort of a grander theme that we need to keep on revisiting in these meetings, is that decentralized, gradual decentralization, governance, and most of the other topics that we discuss in these meetings are what we're proposing is iterative. And the point of these meetings is for all of us to get together and figure it out as we go along. It's going to be a long road, I think, before we come up with a solution that works, and it's probably going to be a series of solutions that work. So nothing's going to be handed down on high. We're coming up on 5 minutes left, and Jordan Crandall has asked a question in Reddit and in our chat that we haven't gotten to yet, and I'd like to address it before the meeting's over. Jordan, do you want to ask, or should Jess recap?
Yeah, so Jordan, I can just go ahead and jump in here. So he asked a number of specific questions, and he'd like to know exactly where the biggest MKR holders that we're talking about, to what extent they expect to be heavily involved in risk assessment, and for instance, where are they now? Like, does Polychain have someone that's on this community call at the moment? And are some of the larger MKR holders from the Maker team intending to submit their opinions and analysis as an MKR holder or as a foundation team member?
So so what's funny about this question is I actually, like, our point has kind of been to actually, that we actually don't want to, like, we don't want large MKR holders, or like MKR holders to like, in the sense of their MKR holdings being like the thing that really matters that much, right? Like, the point is kind of that what you need to be, and the people who need to really be a part of the community and be like super important are the ones with the legitimate science, basically. And actually, all we really need for large MKR holders to do is to either do nothing or delegate their votes to, like, spend some time for them to figure out who of the active governance people do I think are the best ones, and then delegate their votes to them. That being said, Polychain, for instance, are just like a very active community member. I mean, they're just like big fans of Maker, and currently they're not really participating in any public governance at all, although they've planned to do so. Well, I mean, they've been like considering and so on, but there's no like, like if they do, it's going to be like a bigger like public thing, right? Because that would actually be a pretty significant event. But they're being really.
So sorry to interrupt, but this is, by the way, why I'm on the call. Andreessen Horowitz is a token holder. I'm from A16Z Crypto, and just trying to get a sense of how we can best participate, and so learning sort of the lay of the land is the first step, and then as we better understand the processes, I think we look forward to getting involved as well.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Jesse. So I mean, so that's probably the best answer, right? It is actually happening, and like Jesse's saying, right, like someone like Andreessen Horowitz to participate in internet community governance, it's kind of like, it's not something you just like go out and do, right? You need to like first spend a lot of time, like, I mean, first Maker has to be ready for it, right? And then Jesse and Andreessen Horowitz as a whole has to like get a feel for what's even going on, what's even like what's going to happen and so on, right? But then in the long run, I think, it's going to be really like, it's just going to be as like large shareholders, they will just like, even if they're not necessarily expected to really, I mean, really like, or I guess depended on, right? Like, because we kind of want a system that doesn't break if the large shareholders don't act the way we expect them to do. But I mean, they still have that incentive, right? Because I mean, if you're a large shareholder, you just want to make, you don't want some crazy people to come in and screw everything up, right? You want to actually make sure you have a handle on what's going on in governance and in how the parameters are set and so on. And this is the case for all like sort of economic relationships in general, right? I mean, anyone who has an economic interest in something always want to, the larger that interest is, the more likely they are to meddle, I guess is not the right word, but the more likely they are to participate, right, out of their own interest, and also out of, to some degree, I mean, like actual enthusiasm, right? I mean, that's also what I'm sure in both Andreessen Horowitz and Polychain, it's also just like some people are just also into this stuff because they're into crypto and they think it's cool.
Yeah, and not the least. The reason is definitely not that. Sorry, let me rephrase all of that. We're all here because we believe in the project, I think, primarily, and that there's definitely returns to be made here. So I think that assuming the best intentions is probably, or at least financial self-interest is probably the best position to assume at the very outset. Jordan, it's a great follow-up question asking about these large stakeholders having significant financial and infrastructure resources to put towards some of the things that we're talking about. And I agree, and I think that probably those that interest will be expressed in the scientific governance meetings on Thursdays, where we'll start getting increased interest from these larger players. We're coming up on 1 minute past the hour. Rune, did you have any other final thoughts or any points you wanted to make today before we shut it down?
No, I'm all good.
All right, Jesse, did we took like a long road. Did we lose Jesse? Oh.
Yeah, I think Jesse hopped off to another meeting.
All right, I just want to see whether we addressed his questions or not. Does anybody else have any last minute questions, comments? If not, I think we will wrap it up. Thanks, everybody. Another great meeting with a lot of great questions. We'll be posting this on YouTube within a couple hours. Thanks, Jess. Thanks, Rune.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan, David, Thad, Mike, and Stephen. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.